Let's start with the outcomes. Professor Wolfers, for the people who don't follow the news and the numbers, and even if they do, they don't understand it. Can you talk to us about the outcomes? Oh, the numbers that were revealed today.
Right. Um, Let me set the background for if you and I had talked last night. If you and I had talked last night, we would have said, boy, there's some evidence that the economy's starting to slow, but data is incredibly noisy. It goes up and down. So it's not really clear. Should the Fed cut rates? Shouldn't it? And then maybe you would have said, boy, if I look at opinion surveys, people are rating the quality of our economic policy literally worse than they ever have in our past. Consumer confidence is in the tank. Business confidence is in the tank. But boy, I feel good because in the real numbers, things like employment, the economy just keeps on keeping on. That would have been last night. We wake up today and we learned a much harder truth. There is no question that the US economy has slowed. What we learned this morning came from a report called the Jobs Report. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about the number of non-farm payrolls, and if that sounds obscure to you, it's not that we hate farmers. It's that farmers are, what does it mean to be employed as a farmer or not? Very complicated question. And it suggested that we gained 22,000 jobs last month. It also suggested actually the number of jobs fell the previous month. Now, data move up and down like crazy, so the smart thing to do is sort of take a bit of an average, what's been going on. So over the 2 months, we've essentially stopped increasing employment. And that's a dangerous state of affairs. We still don't know how widespread it is, how much this is noise versus signal, all of these things. But I think the last remaining optimists who thought the economy was going to go great, have finally woken up. And for those of us who were worried, mate, you can see the furrows in my brow. Actually, I'm going to tell you the truth. This economy's so bad, I had to go get Botox.
Joe, look what you made Justin Wolfers do. You made him, the economy was so bad, Donald Trump made him get Botox so he doesn't move his face. These numbers, look, I'm an English major, which is why I always bring you on. And even I saw the numbers and the data, and even I know this is no bueno, Professor. The job growth is like stagnant, essentially. Unemployment benefits rising, which means more and more people need those unemployment benefits because they can't get work. And then I don't know if you saw this news report that came out yesterday that showed about Brand USA, right? When it comes to Brand USA, globally, the average U.S. favorability rating of Brand USA is negative 3.24. In January, when right before Donald Trump was president, America had a favorability rating of 15.34. So that means in 7 months, it's an 18-point turnaround to the bottom, where the brand of USA around the world is now toxic. What does that actually mean for people who don't get it? Like, what is that? How does that tangibly impact the economy and Americans?
Yeah, so talking about things like branding feels a little bit like an advertising guy, and I don't really feel like that. And what does a brand mean? But you're actually right. There's a deeper importance to all of this. So you didn't need to run a survey to know that our brand is in tatters around the world. But the most obvious place you can see it, in fact, is Canada. If you've spoken to a Canadian lately, fortunately, I just caught up with my brother who now lives in Toronto. We went to Great Wolf Lodge. I was on all sorts of water slides with children. It was amazing, but
I've been there many, many times for better and for worse. Yes.
Yeah, so at Great Wolf Lodge in Canada, they didn't really like Americans. And ever since President Trump started his 51st state joke, which was by one reading harmless fun from a great comedian, by another reading an utterly pointless provocation with no payoff for Americans, the Canadians have pulled back. There are many, many individual Canadians who, as a matter of course, now simply will not buy American. They feel too insulted. It turns out there are, if you look at exports of wine from the United States to Canada, Canada was one of our most important wine destinations. They've fallen about 90%, 90. Basically, we don't send wine to Canada anymore. Canadians walk into a wine store Those wine stores used to have a bit of Canadian wine. Good luck with that. A lot of American wine and not much else. They cleared out the American stuff. It's now French wine. It's European wine. The Aussies are happy. It's Australian wine. I think this Canadian story is the case study. Yeah. And so then the question is, where do we go? Where else do we see that? I think we're going to see it in students not coming to the United States for their education.
We're already seeing it, Professor.
Yep. Absolutely, we're seeing it. My university, we're making plans around the fact that the best and the brightest from around the world are no longer going to come to the United States and pay $50,000 for the privilege, employing nerds like me to spend time thinking. So American higher education suffering from that. In my line of business, I'm an academic. We hold, one of the great joys has been that America has historically been the center of academic excellence. I'm a rah-rah American booster on that. And as a result, all of the world's great economists, many of them are here. And as a result, many of the most important conferences are here. And this is not just economics. This is medicine. This is biotech. This is technology. This is computer science. This is pure math. On and on it goes. None of them are holding their international conferences in the US anymore. And they can't because they can't feel confident people can get across the border. Now, where does the rubber hit the road there? That is someone working in a hotel in Chicago, a big conference hotel, who makes beds and vacuums floors for a living, who's going to be out of work. That's taxi drivers getting fewer rides and Uber drivers. That's restaurants around convention centers going empty, and it's the convention centers themselves that are already built sitting there empty. So this can go from high-level White House insults on Pennsylvania Avenue to real people and their real lives pretty quickly.
And, when we spoke 2 months ago, I remember just an example, and of course, data moves up and down, but now we have a snapshot. When you have so much data showing so many of the similar trends, right? You have a better, clearer picture. And today's numbers show that picture. And it's a grim picture. But I remember 2 months ago, Las Vegas reported an 11% decrease. And specifically what you said, right? People weren't booking out those hotels. People weren't doing their meetings there, right? We've seen a dip in tourism to America, projected loss of $50 billion that we saw during the summer. Now we know that students, for the first time in years, fewer immigrant students are coming. As you mentioned, these students, they pay full dollar and they then subsidize the domestic students, right? These foreign students pay the full tuition. They ain't coming to America. Brain drain, where some of the best leading researchers, top scientists in medicine and AI are literally being poached by China and Europe. They're like, all right, we'll give you money if the NIH funding is cut. And their U.S. brand is now negative. It went from 15 to negative 3. And you mentioned the example of Canada, and not just that example of Canada. The Liberal Party, the Liberal movement, the Liberal leader was dead in the water, negative 20, folks. And because of Donald Trump's aggressive assault on our ally, literally resuscitate and revitalize the Liberal candidate, and now you have Mark Carney as a president. This is top economist Mark Zandi. This is Fortune magazine from today. I just want to quote Fortune and quote Mark and get your response to this. This is from Fortune, folks. Top economist Mark Zandi warned that the U.S. may already be, in his words, quote, jobs recession. After new data showed just 22,000 jobs were added in August, unemployment rising to a 4-year high, and June revised to the first job loss since 2020. Who was president then? Oh, yeah, Trump. And there was a pandemic. The new data fueled bets on Fed rate cuts as political pressure mounts on the central bank. Before we talk about Fed rate cuts, the R word, recession. Where are you on the recession watch?
I think we're not there yet. Certainly hope. It looks like we are still growing, but slowly. So we're coming down a little bit too close to what that line is. And the thing is, when you get close to that line, a recession is when the economy shrinks. So for the economy to shrink, usually employment would be declining and actually at a reasonably fast clip. And so far, it seems like employment is holding up. It's very hard to read the numbers right now because there's a lot of movement around when will the Doge cuts hit? What if people front-run the tariffs? There's a lot of imports that happen in early August to front-run the tariffs, and on it goes. So very hard to read things. I think we're in the danger zone. The other thing is, remember, we don't actually know where we are at any point in time. We can only have reasonable guesses, like a ship sailing by the stars. Well, a ship sailing by the stars might be 100 miles away from where you think it is. And so I might be saying to you, I think the economy is growing not at a robust rate. And if I'm wrong by 100 miles, we may actually be shrinking, in which case Sandy's right. But I think at a minimum, the following is true. We are one bad shock away from a recession. Now, what's different is our concern that the one bad shock, normally we worry about things like an oil price hike, a war, a drought, an earthquake, new technologies. Here, I think we're worried about it coming from Pennsylvania Avenue. And so Pennsylvania Avenue has brought us to this point that we're one bad news day away from a recession. Now, nature could do its thing. It could create a financial crisis. It could create a crypto crisis. There's a bunch of other things that could now happen that would tip us over that line, and Pennsylvania Avenue might push us over that line too.
Yeah, I want to talk about crypto and also the attack on Federal Reserve. But again, that point of bad policy drives bad outcomes. Folks, just looking at the data, looking at the evidence, trust the evidence of your eyes and your ears, looking at the numbers. And that's all we've talked about right now so far. Data doesn't look good. Right now.
Can I pick up on something here?
Yeah, please.
There's two forms of policy debates. I have a set of left-wing beliefs and I want to argue against you and your set of right-wing beliefs. There's, where you and I might read the evidence differently. You and I might bring different ethical frames. You might care more about business and I care more about the workers, whatever it is. Like, there's good faith arguments that are in the realm of plausible. And I like to talk to people with an open mind and take seriously their concerns and their frameworks about the economy. And those are the debates that normally happen, say, if we'd had a President Romney. And that's what I imagine you spend a lot of your time talking about. But I think we're in a different moment. We're in a moment right now. I don't need to argue with you whether tariffs are good or bad, because it's actually kind of a hard argument. There are parts of it that are hard, which is tariffs help some people and hurt others. Most economists, including myself, think they create more harm than help. But what's absolutely clear is that incompetently applied tariffs, an incoherent policy. And so what I see happening in Washington right now, that I hope everyone can agree on, is a spread of incompetence across the entire policy domain.
Absolutely.
And that incompetence, it doesn't have to be that way. I am just as keen to persuade smart Republicans that what they need is candidates who are competent as I am to persuade them that what they need to do is vote for my favorite candidate. This scourge of incompetence is terrifying, pointless, and no one wins. And it's worth framing what's going on, because it loses the ideological frame, which may feel less sexy, but it's truer. What's going on is incompetence. And it's incompetence that's going to mean there's less money to send your kids to college.
And I'm going to follow up on that with examples about the incompetent policy, because you've been warning about the incompetent policy. But I'll give you an example, folks, of what Professor Wolfers is saying. You saw it yesterday with the bipartisan hearing and grilling of RFK over 2 hours, when you have incompetent, unqualified individuals who have no business being near the Department of Health and Human Securities. You get incompetent, catastrophic results, as in the reduction of vaccinations, the spiking in measles, and the elimination of qualified, brilliant men and women who've spent their lives studying infectious diseases, and the replacement of them with other cranks. You're seeing it in real time. Bill Cassidy, who's a doctor, who's a senator, who took the Hippocratic Oath, who voted for RFK, knew better. And yesterday, of course, he tried to make himself out to be a hero by saying, aha, I got you, RFK, but you voted for him. And so we should have known that a president who has been talking and ranting about trade wars and tariffs for decades, who seems to not understand that tariffs are taxes, who seems to trust Ron Vera, who, by the way, is Peter Navarro, the name he gave himself, and his economic policies. The fact that even Republicans are like, I don't think this will be helpful. The fact that when he gets in power and implements these policies, voila, you're going to get devastating results. So let's go back to the policies. What are the policies that were enacted? Oh, let's take it back to Liberation Day, Professor.
I really appreciate that, because one thing, when I took my first ever macroeconomics course, the teacher, I was in high school, Mr. Lees said, what are the arms of economic policy? Fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policy, and back then, because it was Australia, incomes policy. That's a conversation for another day. Just sort of not relevant to the modern American landscape. So what are we doing on each of those? Trade policy. The president announced tariffs on April 2. He unannounced them on April 7. He gave himself a 90-day pause to make 90 deals. He made none. The 90 days ran out. He gave himself a 24-day extension. And then he basically wrote down a set of tariffs that were Liberation Day tariffs plus or minus a little bit. And they only just came into being in August. And then within a couple of... So right there, you've had 4 months of on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again tariffs. They actually couldn't be implemented. You've then had the president keep changing them, even while he thought he was doing deals based on them. The most overwhelming thing that businesses are saying right now is they literally don't know what the landscape is. And so we now finally have, 10 years after he walked down the golden escalator, a Trump trade policy. But it's already clear it's going to be gone within a week and a half, as he's going to think of something new that he wants done. And that trade policy has just been ruled unconstitutional by the Federal Appeals Court, which means on October 18, unless the Supremes overrule them by then, the tariffs go off. And my guess is they get replaced by something, which means if you've really thought this was a terrific and interesting soap opera, good news, you're only halfway there. You're not even halfway there. That's trade policy. Along the way, we've managed to alienate our friends like Canada and Mexico. And I don't know if you saw President Xi from China.
I was going to ask you that.
Putin from Russia.
Yep.
Modi. And Modi from India having a cuddle. Like, it's great to see grown men hug. I just wish that the United States was an important world power that was invited to the party when important world powers get together and hug. So we have shut ourselves off in the corner, which has other geopolitical consequences, which political gurus who are not me are far more qualified to opine on. That's trade policy. Let's go to fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, they inherited a reasonably large post-COVID budget deficit and government debt, and then made it bigger. And the basic rule of fiscal policy is you try and put a bit of money away when the sun is shining so that you've got a little bit extra for a rainy day. The budget deficit right now is the largest that it's been. I think it would have been the largest ever on the eve of the global financial crisis, which means we've never been drawing down as much, apart from the last couple of decades, even in the depths of a recession. So we're not putting it away for a rainy day. In fact, we're drawing it down as if it were a rainy day. This was also a bill chock full of silly gimmicks. Some of your viewers might like the idea of no tax on tips. My guess is they're going to be less enamored of the reality. But more than that, I'm left asking the question, why is it that certain occupations are getting their tax break and others are not? And I think the answer is, if you actually look at this, no tax on tips ends up costing very little. It's a populist fig leaf where it looks like he's doing something for working middle-class Americans, a few $1 billion, while trillions are going out the door to the rich. So this is not only a fiscal policy that makes no sense given the macroeconomic moment we're in. It's one that is anti-Robin Hood. It takes from the poor and it gives to the rich. So that's fiscal policy. And then monetary policy. Well, governments got out of the business of monetary policy many years ago. They didn't want to politicize it. We wanted an independent central bank.
Good luck. That's not happening anymore.
Not what Trump's been about. So he has harassed Jay Powell. He has illegally, I think, tried to push Lisa Cook off the board.
Yep.
And he's made it clear that he wants to remake this institution in his own image. And we have a lot of experience of what happens when populist strongmen decide to take over central banks. It hasn't happened yet, but we know when Erdogan followed exactly the same playbook in Turkey, inflation went from being pretty normal. Then he appointed a loyalist to the central bank who wanted low interest rates, just like Trump does. And inflation went up to 86% and is still above 30% right now. And the Turkish people have been suffering. So my high school econ teacher, Mr. Lees, hopefully is pleased that I still remember what the major arms of economic policy are. And all of them are pointing in the wrong direction.
And also, as this is happening, and you mentioned this, as everyone else is struggling, you mentioned the rich are getting richer. The billionaire bill was passed, $3 trillion added to the debt, permanent tax cuts for the rich, $180 billion given to ICE, 10,000 ICE agents, more private prisons, more detention centers. He also passed the first pro-crypto legislation, the Genius Act, and also deregulated crypto. And we just found out earlier this week that even though there are all these terrible numbers and data points that you mentioned, there was this one positive data point where one particular family made $5 billion, and that just happened to be the Trump family when it comes to crypto. Why is this bad for America, sir?
It's a very hard question. Boy, I'm glad I studied hard in graduate school for questions like that. So actually, I think you understated the problem. So with the Liberty World Ventures, World Liberty Financial, he's made $5 billion for the family. He also, and it's not the 5 that matters, it's the billion. Let's call it what it is, which is 5,000 million, right? He made himself a millionaire and then did it again and did it again and did it again and just kept doing it. Also, if you remember just a couple of months before that, he issued his own meme coin, Trump coin, which made him gajillions of dollars. And then the next day they came out with Melania coin. Yep. So look, there's 2 ways to object to this. So one is fundamentally ethical, right? You're not meant to get rich. This guy was elected to clean the swamp, drain the swamp. And you don't need me to lecture at your audience about whether they think that is fair, reasonable, moral, ethical, or okay. My role here is to be an economist. So why is this troubling? So the first is he's going to do a lot of regulation around crypto. And I have a guess some of it might be self-serving. And even if I'm wrong, it's going to look self-serving. And it seems like the wrong thing. So this crypto is an industry whose future success really depends more critically on government regulation, the government's approach to it, than it does on technology. And so if the government leans into it, then it will be successful. And if the government thinks it involves more risk than we need in our financial system and tries to make it difficult for regular people to use it, for people to bet on it, things like that, then it's going to be much less successful. So he has a big thumb on the scale there. And then I want to go one step further, which is, you remember the financial crisis in 2008? A lot of guys on Wall Street lost their shirt. There were bailouts of it. And those bailouts felt bad. And I know a lot of my friends on the left and a lot on the right think they were the wrong thing to do. I think it's complicated, which is without the bailouts, maybe we all would have got hurt even worse.
Well, that was bailing out the banks. But
right.
What happens if crypto crashes?
That's the point. If crypto crashes and the president, who seems to have total sway over Congress, says we need to bail this out, and the way this all works is it all happens a little too quickly. Always it happens too quickly. And so the president employs a huge number of economists, and if they're all told, go and find out ways in which reasons for it being important for us to bail out crypto, then we end up holding the bag. We end up bailing out crypto. Now, you can even go a step further than that, which is, I don't particularly care for crypto. I think it's risky and pointless. But now I think there's going to be a bailout if it goes wrong. So it's heads I win, tails the public loses. Even though I think it's a bad investment, now I'm thinking about investing in it. Right? And so what that does is gets more money in seeking more risk because they think it's going to be the public who pays, not them. And that actually enhances, even if the president doesn't do anything, the perception he might do something is enough to lead people to take greater risks, which increases the likelihood there is, in fact, a crypto-related financial crisis. By the way, there's a very easy solution to all of this. I know crypto and markets and crashes and bank runs all feel very complicated. The much simpler solution is, when you're in office, take the $400,000 salary and don't try and get rich. And if that's all you did, your only incentive is to do the right thing for the American people. And that's why we've had such strong ethics rules. That's why Jimmy Carter sold the peanut farm, metaphorically. That's why in all past White Houses, people have been forced to resign from an enormous number of things to make sure there's not only no conflict, there's no perception of a conflict. And what we're seeing, and it's easy to forget, is so far out of what we've ever seen. It's crazy.
I used this analogy before. I thought it was just kind of being hyperbolic, but it's like the Oval Office being used as the personal ATM of Donald Trump and his family. And when you have conflicts of interest as a servant of the people, you're no longer the servant of the people. You have your thumbs on the scale of economic policy that will be disastrous for the country. But you will get to make money. It reminds me, I have to use this analogy because I was waiting to use this analogy. I used it earlier before. The great Paul Thomas Anderson movie, There Will Be Blood, where Daniel Day-Lewis portrays the symbol of American capitalism, greed, and cruelty. And he explains in simple terms how he was able to make so much money to his friend who comes years later looking for a handout. I have a straw, and my straw goes into your milkshake, and I drink up all your milkshake. And you sat there and thought there was milkshake, but I drunk it all up. And I feel right now that there are a few people drinking up all the milkshake, Professor, and leaving us with nothing. And I'm not an economist. That's why I bring you on the show. I feel like the warning signs are blinking red, sir. Like, I know your job isn't to scare us, but I am nervous.
So, first of all, you're not going to believe this, but I have the prop for you. I have a straw.
Oh, there you go. That wasn't planned, folks. It wasn't planned.
Fun fact for the audience is I did something brave this summer. I learned how to sing. I've never taken a singing lesson in my whole life.
Well done, sir.
And my singing teacher taught me that if you warm up by singing into the straw, apparently it's very good for your vocal cords. So that's why that's here. Let me come back to what you just said. First of all, I think we don't ever want to be doom and gloom all the time, people. So I just want to remind people that we are currently living in one, not quite the richest, but pretty much the richest country in the world.
Correct.
And this is the richest year in the richest country in the history of the world. No one's ever had it better than us. I just want to remind us of that. Now, you and I are having, I think, an important conversation, but it's a conversation about how far we fall short of what we could be. And when it comes to economics, that really matters, because if we fall short by 2%, 2% of a shit ton is still a lot.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be that way. So, no, I don't think the sky's falling. But yes, I think the costs are pointless and large. And here's where I think the scare should be. In economics reporting, there's a norm where people think about what's happening to the economy this month. You and I did it already, right? What happened to the job numbers? Sometimes talk about what happened this year. But actually, the really important stuff happens over much longer periods. So if you can make comparisons. How's the economy in 2025 compared to 2023? It's a couple of percent up or down. Sort of, who cares? How's the US economy compared to Argentina? That's a difference. There are people in Argentina who really can't get by right now. The Argentinian middle class is much, 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 much poorer than the American middle class. And then actually the country I was born in is Papua New Guinea, which is, I don't want to call it a failed state because I was born there.
Yeah.
But a disaster and in grinding poverty. And so that leads you to ask the question as an economist, what is it that makes the United States rich, Argentina much poorer, and Papua New Guinea in grinding poverty? And we have a lot of research into that. And it's basically the answer comes down to being the quality of our political and economic institutions. It's very deep issues like democracy, like do we have a political system that tries to grow the pie rather than take a bigger scoop for yourself? So are the institutions extractive, is the words we sometimes use. It's markets, might be a less popular claim on a podcast called Left Hook, but capitalism, for all its flaws, sure grows that pie. And it's the profit motive, it's entrepreneurism, it's science, research and development. That's what we learn from those cross-country comparisons. Now let's come back and think about what the Trump agenda is. And this is where your point about undermining science and vaccines. mRNA vaccines have the potential to create so many more days of life and days of happiness and days of joy, literally billions. Undermining the Fed is undermining one of those institutions that allows the economy to function well. Firing the commissioner of the BLS means we want a yes man who will give us the numbers we want, even if they're not true, which means we're going to steer by a set of economic statistics that are simply not true. The president thinking that he gets to decide the logo for Cracker Barrel. I know that sounds weird, but then well, what's the point of innovating on logos if the president gets to set it? Deciding that we're going to take a 10% stake in Intel, and on it goes. So we have an increasingly interventionist telling Harvard who to hire, telling Harvard what should be on the syllabus. This interventionism is also something that's never served other countries well. There's a really interesting recent study that looked at every populist leader elected around the world for a century. And it found on average that the typical populist led the level of income, GDP, they're the same thing, to be 15% lower. But it took 15 years. And 15% lower would mean that everyone's outcomes would be 15% worse than they otherwise would have to be. You could think about that as a whole bunch of resources we can use to make sure kids are never hungry again. Maybe that 15% would have just gone to the rich. Maybe it would make our lives a little more comfortable. Maybe it's money we can spend on healthcare and extend our lifespans. Well, that's what disappears. And it's going to happen without drawing a single headline because it plays out over a period of decades. And that's why one of the things you began at the top of the show was we have military in the cities. That's actually not a useful set of institutions, right? We have the White House in our markets. We have these institutions that everyone has taken as important and not to be destroyed, left or right, being destroyed. We have a war on science, and on it goes. So those are the things I'm scared about, rather than the headline of day-to-day, this or that.
I appreciate your time. As always, Professor Wolfers is a man in demand. You will see him on MSNBC and CNN. He is an economics professor. I pretty much have brought him on every month, if you noticed. The top of the month, I bring him on, and he always says yes. And speaking about the devastating impacts on science and on researchers and on truth, right after Professor Wolfers, I'm going to jump on with Dr. Mark Elaine Derry, who's a brilliant doctor, an infectious disease physician from Louisiana, who will tell you all exactly what Professor Wolfer says, is that when you go after science and brilliant minds and the truth, what it does to a nation's health, folks. There's different indicators of health, economic indicators of health, physical indicators of health, right? So this is where we are. So we're going to go from the economy to health. Professor Wolfers has a Substack that he doesn't use. I'm trying to convince him to actually jumpstart it.
I got some news for you, brother. You are 2/3 of the way to convincing me to setting my Substack live. So if anyone's watching and they're mildly interested, I'm not going to do it tomorrow, but I'm hoping I might get there within a month. So it wouldn't be a bad time to subscribe to. I think it's Justin Wolfers. Maybe it's Think Like an Economist. I forget.
I've tried my best to promote you despite your best efforts not to do it.
You've been amazing, and I'm grateful to you for it. And your audience has been amazing too.
Because it's sitting there, prime real estate not being used. I'm like, why? So we're going to get Professor Wolfers finally to use his existing Substack to actually put out this content to all of you. And I will link to it and then more of you will subscribe to it, and they will see the notifications, and they will be reminded, oh yeah, I have a Substack. Maybe I should use it. But for the 1,200 people who joined us late, this has been the Left Hook. There's no paywalls. This has been Professor Wolfers of the University of Michigan, economist. I kept him 5 minutes beyond. This will be out later today. It's all free, folks. Thank you for coming. Join me up in a minute. I'm going to sign off and sign back in with Dr. Mark Alain Derry, an infectious diseases expert and a physician from Louisiana, to talk about RFK and the assault on our doctors on science, on truth, and vaccines. And this has been Professor Wolfers. Thank you so much. Final word to you, sir. Shamelessly promote yourself.
Oh, I'm not very good at that, but I am grateful to you and your audience for making me push a step forward. So thank you to you all. And wow, that next segment sounds amazing. So I look forward to that too.
Take care, buddy. Thank you, sir.
Take care, brother.